Welcome to the egcfpodcast, where we have in-depth conversations about topics that we may not cover on Sunday morning. My name is Nate, and today I'm joined by Rob Woodrum, Janelle Green, Matt Green, and Blake Roseman. In this episode, we talk about why we don't talk about politics here at Eastgate.
Hi, my name is Rob. I'm one of the pastors here at Eastgate.
I'm Janelle. I'm also one of the pastors here at Eastgate.
I'm Blake. I'm the community pastor here at Eastgate.
My name is Matt. I'm the worship pastor here at Eastgate.
Okay, so we just got, I guess we got a new pope.
The world did.
The world.
Congratulations, Nate.
I mean, you may
new-
not be part of that tradition,
got a
but
new-
there is a new pope, and it affects the world. So
Yep,
go
it
ahead.
affects the world. So I saw a post about it this morning, and under the comments, one of them said,
There's
it
your
is the
first
church's
mistake.
duty to talk about politics. And another comment right under that said, the church should not talk about politics at all. So what is Eastgate's view on talking about politics?
So I'm glad we didn't come with a loaded question or just everything very non-controversial. We can just talk about butterflies and
Let's just
and-
each say who we voted for. I think that's, this will go
And
well.
then in the circle, give a thumbs up or thumbs down if you think it's okay.
We
just,
should,
just your offerings should reflect how happy you are about it.
instead of saying who we voted for, let's put it online and let people comment on who we voted for.
So
Where do you think podcasts go, Blake? Let's not talk about it. Let's put it on.
you know what? I just remembered I have to relace all of my shoes today, so I will talk to y'all later.
He's wearing flip-flops.
So let me start by saying that you saw polar opposite responses in the comments. One saying that it's a church's duty to talk about politics. The other saying it should be staying out. What's intriguing about that is I agree with both of those statements, and they're held in tension. So when we talk about politics, and that's what we really need to define here, because we have to understand what we're talking about in this. When we talk about politics is a neutral concept, right? We agree on that.
Feel like that.
Well, politics in terms of what it is, what we're talking about, the word is referring to how power is used, how societal rules are established, how resources are used, things like that. That's a reasonable thing. That works in any context. A church has politics that we have to work through. A family has politics that they have to work through in terms of how these things. And the Bible has a lot to say about the use of power and how resources should be used and things like that. So absolutely, the church should be speaking into that concept. But when it comes to partisan politics, and I think that's what we've got to really make sure that we've clearly defined, partisan politics has no place within the context of the church community because it by nature is divisive. And if there's anything that Paul emphasizes over and over and over again through the New Testament is to eradicate those things that become divisive within the community. So that was a short podcast. Let's go.
Thank you, everybody, for
All right,
being
next
here.
topic.
I think, though, that you've had pushback from people wishing you talked more about politics, right? Or no?
Partisan politics.
Like partisan politics.
Yes.
That, and I know that there's also been times where people have heard what you said, even though you were not speaking in partisan politics, and they're translating it
And that's just
and how they understand it.
And that's just an overall characteristic of our society right now. And that's intentional. It's we have on a societal level, I believe, been manipulated to be responding and thinking like this. So it's an interesting thing. So here's an old man. He's going to start waxing, philosophical as old people do. But there was a time back in the good old days, but in all seriousness, when I was growing up, there were two things my dad cared about. It was Gunsmoke when it came to the TV. I'm sorry, I should say that.
So a very specific thing to care about. Not guns, not smoke.
It has to be together. And you probably don't. Do you have any idea what Gunsmoke is?
Yeah,
Do you know what I'm talking about? It was a
it's
TV
a
show with
TV
Marshall
show.
Dillon and Festus. Anyway, let me break that down for you, and we'll
I'm
get that.
so excited because
Come to the
you
Eastgate podcast
started
for modern references.
about.
Gunsmoke.
I also just like that. You're like, just be patient with me. I'm an old man. I'm a philosopher. My dad loves Gunsmoke. Like, I was really excited. Like, I was all geared up. Like, thank you, God. Like, we're gonna get some good wisdom. And I'm like, what just happened?
This is your childhood encapsulated, though. So
My dad watches TV too.
You think you're special?
Have gun will travel.
okay, so
I'm really excited to see where this is going.
that was it.
Really wanted to talk about guns.
So here's what I should have done it the other way around.
No.
And the CBS nightly news. It was with Walter Cronkite. Had to get it. So news for him, that was a one time a day action that he would seek out. And that's the way news worked. Like you would go and seek out news and find, what's happening in the world and determine these things.
And there wouldn't be a lot of choice.
You didn't have a lot. You had 3 channels on your TV. So,
You got to get up to change
Everybody got
them.
the same news.
Everybody pretty much got the same news, and that's a huge thing right there. That's all changed now. Obviously, news comes to us. You have no choice in that matter anymore. You're not seeking anything out. It's showing up in your feed. It is a constant aggregation right in front of you. And we're not all receiving news from the same sources, so we are not living in a shared reality. And all that does is create, again, this is Rob's, opinions. So take them or leave them, whatever. But that creates this tension that we're living in right now. Without people having a shared sense of reality, the tension that's there and the conflict and the outrage is just intensified, which boosts all of the numbers for people who are trying to peddle whatever it is that is going to make you feel good and confirm your worldview and keep you isolated from the others. It's intentional. I believe there's no possible way this could have happened accidentally. This is
And it's for people to make money.
Well,
and
it's not like in
absolutely,
an effort to,
absolutely,
it's not in an
to make money and also to pull the strings of power. That both of these things come into play in this.
And I know that you say it's intentional. I think that I don't know that it's fully intentional outside of the fact that humans are humans.
Well, yeah.
And so, as far as the news gathering or understanding of how news works now, back in the day, the news station that Walter Cronkite was on didn't really make money. And then I've heard that during the Watergate scandal is whenever people were trying to find out more about what was happening with Watergate and Nixon and that kind of thing. And that's whenever news stations recognized that they could have news on more than 1 hour a night. And it propagated into it, but money was the driving force of all that.
Of course,
they're like, oh, we can sell commercials on this now and that kind of thing. And so it's just evolved into what we have now.
Well, I would say that, and all. I mean, yeah, obviously there were events happening that were causing people to want to see it more. Although I would say, like through the Vietnam War and all those things,
Right.
people still just consumed their news
Yes.
in half an hour bites in the evening times, and then you move on through your day, and those things process however they process. The rise of 24-hour news and internet as well has changed the game significantly. We all know that. That's all been recognized, and I always, it's hilarious to me because it's not news. It's newsertainment. It's never. I don't care what channel you're talking about. People say, oh well, yeah, these guys over here, they always do it skewed, or this guy. I mean, it's all skewed, all of it.
Yes.
There's like, what did I see? There's like 5 corporations that own pretty much all of the news that's presented to us, and it's hard not to be cynical and to think that that's coordinated and manipulative.
And do you think that's why Gunsmoke's not on TV anymore?
I think so. I'm convinced of that.
There's a conspiracy.
Absolutely. They're going to keep Marshall Dillon down.
I like what you said a bunch of years ago. You were saying that there's not enough content to fill 24
That's
hours
right.
worth of news, and so they have to find and create quote unquote news instead of doing air quotes.
Well, any given time that and I never recommend watching any of that garbage, but if any time you do turn that on, I mean, it's always 3 or 4 heads on the screen yelling past each other. I mean, that's not news. That's not it. That's all that is.
That's a family dinner.
That's right.
So, this may or may not be relevant to what we're talking about, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So I used to be addicted to news and watched it, tried to consume as much as I could, from different sources at the time. But basically, I got overwhelmed with it as a Christian, and I was through prayer and things like that. I was, what I ended up doing was fasting from it. And so what I tried was the first time was like 3 days. I turned off the radio, didn't watch the TV and that kind of thing for about 3 days. And then I turned it back on and I was like, nothing, not a whole lot's changed. It was still kind of the same story. So I can go a little bit longer. I went a week and then 2 weeks and then a month. And then I came back and I'm like, oh, they're still talking about the same thing with like one little nuanced twist in it or one little change. And I was like, oh, there's nothing major happening. It sounds major. Mm-hmm. With the emotion that the what would be the reporter or
the anchor.
The anchor, yeah, because I use that term loosely. But with the emotion, it makes it sound like it's life or death, now or never. It's all going to end if we don't fix this right now. But recognize it. So now I was able to get out of that news cycle by just fasting from it, and God delivered me from needing to know what was happening all the time.
Sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, I will, but nothing ever stops me from saying something at some point. But go ahead.
I was thinking about that. I know that there was a season where, especially during election years, the politics gets talked about a lot more, and people talk about it in church. And I'm just thinking about, in terms of people just having conversations in church about politics, where do you think that lands in terms of, because I know we're clear on okay, from the stage and from the teaching perspective, we're not going to explain, we're not going to share partisan.
We're not using our platform
That's
in any fashion
to promote partisan
right.
politics.
It should be a mystery who we voted for from that perspective. But just in terms of people coming to church, if they're listening to this podcast, do you think they're thinking, oh, I should never talk about who I voted for when I'm here at church? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that,
or do you have thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, sure, I have thoughts, but again, it's.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please do.
I think any hard and fast rule is probably wrong. We're not.
Yeah.
I don't think we're.
There we go.
And so, saying, never talk about politics at Eastgate is probably, or partisan politics, is probably not what we're saying. But I do think that the hope is what we're representing from the stage, because again, I would argue that we talk about politics a lot. In fact, we reference
the Bible does,
yeah. But even more than just sort of how do you govern and how do you rule, I think we regularly reference the way America. I'm going to talk about American politics. We live in America. That's sort of what we're beating around the bush, but that's what we're talking about. I do think we reference how American politics are affecting our walk as Christians.
Yeah.
Without being specific about who's to blame or what's the right way. But I would even argue sometimes when we talk about the larger evangelical Christian church, that is a political statement in some ways, because we're talking about the leaders and the rulers and whether we think that what they're doing is right or not, usually not. And then when you talk about politics, we're saying things like, be careful about what you read and hear and be mindful and prayerful and remember that that grace is covering all this stuff. And,
Yeah, that was what I wanted to say in terms of and I agree with what you're saying there, Matt, but the person who's saying so I never can talk about politics when I'm gathering with Eastgate, certainly you can, but grace is grace is the overriding factor on every part of our interaction with one another. And because it's such a volatile and divisive subject in the world right now, I would say, yeah, talk about politics if you want to, but do so cautiously, carefully, and submitted to God and His purposes on all these things. And
I was just thinking about that. I feel like I have had that conversation where you're talking to the person in front of you. Maybe you feel strongly about I really think it's important that I say this thing and that it's important that they know how I feel. Mm-hmm. And I'm always, what I end up trying to say in reaction to that is I really want to be person-centered. the person in front of me, I want to be
Right
centered.
on.
Like, where are they at? Like, how can I love this person? And I feel like the pushback sometimes is, I am person-centered. My politics are all about people. And I think sometimes when we say that, we're getting a little high on our horse, that we think that what we say to this person, what's more important when I'm having a conversation with this person is that they understand my moral stance and thinks that, and we think that that's going to make the big worldly change. And I disagree.
Yes.
You do not have that power that you think. I do think you have the power to show love to that person, and that will change them.
I agree.
And not even just love, respect. Like,
Dignity.
I've had conversations with people at Eastgate who have political differences than me. And what I always try to do, and because I'm in the same culture everybody else is, I feel sometimes very, like, triggered's the wrong word. I feel like I want to say, I want to argue. But I don't, because I'm like, that's not going to help anything. And this person, I respect them, and I care about what they have to say, and I don't know. Now
Yeah,
I'm
I
rambling,
think
but-
I see what you're saying, and I agree. I think that it's an interesting thing because we live in a culture that's very much on social media and in person. Like, I have an opinion, and I have a right to share that opinion. And I think what stood out to me so much with 1 Corinthians when we were studying that and Sunday mornings is Paul acknowledging the rights that the Corinthians had and encouraging them to lay down those rights for the sake of their fellow Christian. And I think that we lose that sometimes.
We do.
And I think that so often, when I'm here at church, people will be sharing with me what they feel passionately about, and sometimes it is their partisan politics. I have the right to respond and say, I disagree because of X, Y, and Z. But I lay down those rights because that provides a better opportunity for me to listen and to love this person.
That's right.
And then through that, I can hear their heart of, like, sometimes there's fear there. Oh, you're scared. I get scared too. And we can find those commonalities
Yes.
without having to fight one another.
Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, I want to hear
Well,
what
I
you.
was just going to say that my side job right now is as a counselor, and one of the things that they teach us that is really important is to be client-centered. And so I think this is a good way to think of it, which is to try our best. And I'm not even just talking about leadership in Eastgate, but anybody who's maybe even listening to this and has conversations with people we disagree with, is to do your best to remove our immediate reaction to something. Somebody says something about how they feel, and our thought is, well, let me tell you how I feel. And instead, move into an empathy phase.
There
of
it goes.
Okay, so when somebody says this thing, like Janelle was saying, oh, they seem scared, or they're really excited, or whatever it is, and move into the emotion. Like, oh, yeah, so you're excited about that. And then you can kind of talk about it. And then honestly, when you start to empathize with somebody and connect with somebody, they can then hear you. If you
Exactly.
get to that place, you can then say, you know what's funny is I actually kind of feel this other way, but I'm excited that, like, we're both thinking about this and that we can talk about it. And but it's the respect that I think has to come first for people to ever,
I
hear
agree.
anything we have to
I
say.
agree 100% on that. And that's, I mean, so the original question, why are we reticent to ever allow partisan politics to find its way? There's also multiple reasons why we wouldn't want that to happen or to be taking those kinds of sides. For one thing, it works against the inclusiveness of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is, pulling all of us in. So if we all of a sudden create boundaries like, well, if you vote this way, I'm not so sure. I was counseling with a young couple who was going to get married years and years ago. And they had been a part of a church where they decided they weren't going to go any longer because they had a bumper sticker on their car that was promoting a political cause. And they got accosted for it, saying, you don't really belong in this church if that's what you believe. And they were like, oh, you're right. and they left, which, I don't know their whole story. I'm not trying to judge either way on that. But that's the kind of stuff that we cannot do. I mean, we just cannot. That has nothing to do with anybody's opinion about anything. It has to do with what the scriptures declare to us. And I think the other side of that as well, and I think the thing that we have lost sight of, especially as the American evangelical church, is that we are representative of a kingdom.
Right.
It's the kingdom of God. Yeah, there's politics involved in that, but it's kingdom politics, and it has to do with God's purposes and God's will and what God's doing in representing His rule to the rest of the world. And every other government, including our government, is a provisional government under the true King. And our role as believers is we can speak to the powers. That happens all the time. Jesus did it. To speak to the powers, to remind them of what's right and what God expects, what God's revealed in His Word as to how people are to be treated, but not to be getting in there as though God has favored one of these parties. I disagree with that profoundly.
And I think, too, something that happens, and I think it probably comes from watching a lot of news, which is like these terrible things are happening when you watch the news. These terrible things are happening, but these people can help fix it. And so I think that that's part of even how we get so ingrained in one side of politics versus the other, is because it's like we're scared that these things are going to happen, and we look to these political leaders as the ones that are going to solve these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and then it also can be an identity thing as well, in terms of seeing who we are based on who we vote for. And I think that those are both things we are not a part of in the Christian church.
That's right.
That is not our identity, and that is not who we look to rescue us.
That's
Obviously,
right.
God can use anybody, and I'm not saying
Of course He can,
people
yes.
can't be used, but I don't need a certain person to win to be able to go to bed at night knowing I'm going to be okay. I go to bed at night knowing I'm going to be okay because of Jesus, and that He's got us, and we can trust in Him and His plan. And so
That's right.
just that kind of encouragement, hopefully, to people too, that, sometimes people that you vote for win, and that's exciting, and sometimes people you vote for don't win, and there can be a fear of what's going to happen, what's the world going to
Right.
look like, and just remembering like what you said, we have another kingdom that we're a part of.
Is it worth mentioning too that we as people who are in leadership, staff, and board are not saying that we're above. We've all voted, or probably a lot of us have voted. Maybe we didn't all vote.
You voted?
But
there's a civic duty
I guess
that
what
we
I'm saying
fulfill.
is that we obviously, I guess what I want to say is that, and I don't think we're coming across this way, but I just want to be clear. We're not above this. We obviously we are in the same world that you are, and we're doing our best, just like hopefully you are, to make the best decision we can. But what's interesting is that we know, because we're close, we have not all voted the same way, not on the staff and board.
No.
We have people who feel differently, but it has never become a point of contention.
That's right.
In our relationship. It's never made us question whether the person deserves love or respect. And
Yeah, I'm actually really proud of the fact that I think between staff and board, if we were all together, we would probably every category would be filled on a ballot, and I love that. But I do think too, with what you're saying, Matt, is I think it even goes back to what we're talking about with tithing and money in the church, and just kind of putting these things in their proper place.
Right.
Money is not everything, and politics are not everything, and just making sure yes, they are a part of our lives, but in the proper order.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking too about how you said there, we put a lot of, we get afraid if the person we vote for didn't win, or we get really excited if the person we voted for did win, and how that's really coming from a place of we're putting a lot of trust in these people because we're giving them a lot of power. We are giving them power when they are put into place. What's interesting is that we sort of serve a God who's not just powerful, but is also all loving. Mm-hmm. And the people that we're putting into power, they have elements of them, I assume, that are loving, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But they are not all loving. They're not even all powerful. But it was something where I just suddenly was what hope we find in a God who we don't have to vote for. He's already there. And he's, what is it? The only perfect government is a benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty.
That's a famous saying.
In some ways, it's a total simplification, but we sort of have that as kingdom people. It's
Absolutely. Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay, all right. I didn't. Dictatorship, I know, can be a hot button term.
And you're a movie guy, so I'd point you to a great conversation that's held in the movie Chariots of Fire. Chariots of Fire. The conversation, between these two good Presbyterian believers, but talking about the benevolent dictatorship and how the only one we could trust with that would be God. because at the center of all that there is this being who loves us purely and without reserve. So how could you not trust?
Any other type of dictatorship is wrong.
Exactly.
And that's why we don't do it. But so we're doing the best we can. What is it? There's another famous quote like democracy is the worst form of government.
That's
other
Winston
than all the
Churchill.
others.
Yeah. Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government there is, except for all the others.
And I think that's a good way to just remind us, like, guys, this is like to all of us, like, yeah, we're going to do our best. We're going to do our studying. Like when it comes up to voting and making decisions and having your stance. Yeah, do your due diligence.
Right.
But then recognize,
follow your conscience.
Yeah. But then recognize that you're living in a flawed state like the rest of us are, and you're doing your best. You assume other people are doing their best. Give grace to each other and be respectful. Yeah.
Blake looks really mad about what you're saying. Blake,
I'm not mad.
you're just disappointed?
I'm not
I
mad.
haven't looked
I'm
at
just
Blake in a while.
disappointed.
It's been nice.
I know it. That's my practice.
No, actually, yeah, Blake, what are you
Blake,
thinking?
how are you feeling?
I think for some people, political agendas can be dangerous to certain people, and it can be difficult within a church setting.
Define dangerous. What do you mean when you say dangerous? Because I don't. That's a loaded statement.
There can be policies that can adversely affect tremendously certain elements of our population. So you might just have to edit all this out, and that's fine. I don't mind. But I mean, for a minority population, there's certain policies that can be implemented. There's certain mindsets that can be implemented that can make things dangerous for minority families. And I have to pay attention to those things. I have to be mindful of those things because my window of just protecting my own family is pretty limited between something being implemented and the time that I have to do something about it. So, I mean, I know that sounds extreme.
So
and I have to trust God that he's going to be taking care of those things. But we've seen these things in other nations before.
Do you think it's a privileged perspective to say, like, hey, however you vote is okay? Is that kind of how it's coming across?
I know y'all's heart. I know that I know that you want to do the right thing. And I think that we are doing the right thing by not platforming anything. I know that we're doing the right thing by being a part of certain programs in the community that are trying to do the right thing. And there's a safety that I feel in that with, like Pastors United, for instance. There's, it's a really comforting thing. It's something that my wife and I have spoken about. Like, if things go stupid, we've got a whole group of pastors and churches that are trying to do the right thing. But, we also have, Spanish-speaking churches in our community that are relying on or waiting on policies and watching policies that are happening to try and determine what course of action that they're going to have to take for their lives, for their churches, and those type of things. And, I have to kind of remind myself all the time what you were talking about with God, that I have to remind myself all the time. I have one king, and I'm the citizen of one kingdom. And that kingdom is bigger than all the kingdoms of this world. We, whatever empire that I end up finding myself in throughout history or location or geography, there is one king and one kingdom that I'm a part of. And I do trust that, but I have to constantly remind myself of those things because, some of this stuff goes beyond like how my tax dollars are used or, what school my kid gets to go to, or if there's going to be funding for, special needs programs and these type of things. Is he still going to get to go to school? Some of these things like will really directly affect me and possibly, pretty intensely.
At risk of committing a false equivalency. Because I agree with you. That's sort of a perfect example of what we're talking about, I think. Which is that based on the best information you have, and I know you, so obviously I know the kind of research you're doing, and I know that you're thoughtful and mindful about it, and you consider there are people who would potentially be on the opposite side. And I know we're trying to be very,
Neutral.
cautious about
should
where
be.
we're at,
We should be.
but there would be people on the other side of, and if you were in a debate with somebody
Who are thinking
who would
the same
be
thing.
just as passionate
Mm-hmm.
about their fears as you are about yours. And that's where the division comes up, is we think, well, if you are afraid of this and I'm afraid of this and we can't even see it the same way, I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm saying that is then the only option is to call you, and again, I'm not saying you're doing this, is to call you evil, to call you stupid, to say
You don't
you're
care
against
about-
me, you don't care about me. When I think the answer is we are all part of the same system that's trying to divide us, trying to give us information that splits us apart. And I'm going to trust that even though we disagree, I'm going to trust that you are going to continue to do the work to try. I'm going to continue to do the work to try.
And this is the thing. So even just in this conversation, what strikes me is that what the continual news cycle and all of this that is fed to us gives us or imposes on us is a false sense of agency, as though somehow through the political machinations that are there or through my protest or whatever, I've got the agency to make something like this change. I disagree with that. I think the only agency we have is in our trust in God and our appeal to Him to bring about the changes that are necessary to
But
preserve
even
and
then,
protect.
though, I mean, and I think I'll just address it the way it is. I'm not sure I agree. I think that we do have some agency. That's why we vote. That's why we talk to people about the opinions we have. I believe that the biggest thing we have is our trust in God as Christians. But I guess I feel
Yeah,
like if we
you
go
know
too
what?
far, we could just lay in a bed and say, I just trust God. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to.
You're right.
Oh, the
And-
world's falling apart. Oh, well.
Listen, I disagree with what I said so much that's got to get edited out. I mean that. I'm totally serious.
I really like that I got to call you out.
No, but you're absolutely right, and that is a
Well-
a fallback.
But I think it's
attitude
true,
that
but
I
I
have
think that
that
there
I
is a
think-
truth to it as far as just the most important thing as Christians is that we have to trust God.
And I really think that the most important thing as Christians is to, with the people that are right in front of us and directly surrounding us, to bring to bear the values of the kingdom of heaven in that environment.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking, first of all, Blake, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable. I appreciate the perspective that you're bringing, and I think that it's important to help us remember that.
And I know he wouldn't say that because he's too nice that we were speaking from a place of privilege. I'll say that I am regularly reminded that I am in a place of privilege,
Mm-hmm.
and not reminded although the culture does sometimes remind me, but I think it is important for myself to remember my perspective is not the perspective of everybody.
Right.
And so I appreciate, I don't mind saying, yes, we're speaking from a place of privilege. Sorry, Janelle, go ahead.
But yeah, just wanted to say thank you for sharing and just helping us to remember that sometimes we can look at the big picture of politics and forget the way that they can affect people personally.
Mhm. And the people that we know, and the people that we care about and love.
And I think that I hear what you're saying, Matt, too, of you have somebody saying a similar thing and it feeling very personal on the other side of the political party spectrum. But I think that this is where we can learn how to listen to each other, because there's lots of options for responses, and even people listening to this podcast could listen and be like, but that's where you're wrong and that's where blah, blah, blah. But I think it's important for us and whoever's listening to this podcast to hear Blake's heart and his
Right.
fears and his care for his family. And we can just hear that and know and say, I care for your family too. And I
Right.
want them to be safe and I want them to be well cared for. And so whatever we can do to support you and remind you that you're not alone, we want to do that.
Right
And
on.
You guys do that all the time. And so getting back to talking about how even we on staff and board that's one of the coolest things I think about Eastgate is I mean, we do have a grand poobah, and we all must.
Wait,
I
what?
haven't bowed to Rob yet today. Have you guys done your daily bows?
But we have as
killing
far
him.
as staff and board, we have incredibly diverse as far as mindsets, age, race, gender, all of it. I mean, it is really great. We do get to hear each other's perspective all the time, and we always do lead with respect and dignity and humanity with all the decisions that we're faced with, and the way that we interact with each other. And I think that expands out into the community, because we do have the same community as we do on board and staff, which is pretty phenomenal.
Totally. I agree. I've, for the most part, experienced people showing respect.
Something too that I'm proud of with being a part of a church setting that is diverse in the way that everybody votes and thinks politically is that, sometimes when you get outside of the church realm, that you can kind of live in a bubble of being surrounded by people that all think and vote the same way as you, and it's really easy to like vilify the other perspective. And I heard somebody talk about how they are not a part of a church, and that's okay, but they were just saying like this was a neighbor that wanted to come over for like a party thing, and they're like, but they voted for so and so obviously we couldn't have them over. And it was like they're in a bubble where that is the, like, obviously, yes, like, because you can't invite them over because they're a terrible person. And so just like making those judgments on people, and that I felt very thankful for, like, the fact that it forces you to humanize different perspectives. That I can say, oh, I know people who voted for this person, I know people who voted for this person, they're amazing, wonderful people. I would never define them by who they vote for or limit.
I mean, that's the whole thing, that where the values of the kingdom of heaven are supposed to be reinforcing how it is that we interact, which is politics, how it is we interact with one another. It's the values of the kingdom of mutual respect, of love, joy, peace. It's those elements that we're supposed to be that are meant to enable us to transcend what's going on these political levels, even with their policies.
Wow. And then the fruit, you started listing the fruits of the Spirit, and I was just thinking through them. And how none of the fruits of the Spirit are winning in an argument.
No.
It's so I was thinking about
really
having
cool.
a conversation with somebody about politics where you disagree. What are the fruits? What are the fruits we want to see out of that conversation?
Right on.
Love. Okay, so that's not about convincing them. Joy. That's certainly not about convincing them. Peace, obviously. Love, joy, peace, patience. I mean, that's a huge one to remember. There's literally not one. In fact, gentleness, I think, is one that we really forget a lot of times in these arguments. Even if we're being loving, quote unquote, but we're being harsh and convinced we're correct, that's not very gentle. Anyway, so
And I just want to say too, as someone who's been a part of conversations where I have opinions that I choose to lay down those rights and not share those opinions in order to be loving, it feels really good. Yeah. Like, I walk away feeling so much happier with myself and that version of myself than the person who sat there and tried to convince them that they were wrong. So just to encourage anybody, because we have those things that are built up, and it's like, I have things I could say, and to let those go can be challenging, but just as an encouragement that when you do, it feels good.
And again, we have to think in terms of Jesus' example. Jesus faced off against the powers, like both the religious powers and the religious authorities, which were equivalent to political authorities in Jerusalem, as well as the political powers of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And how did he deal with it? Did he argue his way with them? In fact, he made it so clear. And, we talk about the separation of the church and state. And, there's all these arguments back and forth. Jesus is the one who established that way back when talking with Pontius Pilate, saying, my kingdom is not of this world. Not saying that my kingdom is off in space somewhere or some place far away. He's saying that does not operate the way the kingdom's otherwise, and that's what he pointed to as an example. Otherwise, my followers would do what? They'd take up arms. They'd storm this place. They'd do what was necessary to rescue me.
Yeah.
But that's not how his kingdom works.
So as far as politics entering the church, because the culture it seems like to me, in every geography or time, culture ends up infiltrating the church in some kind of a way or another. And what we have now, and I see it on both sides vehemently, is that the other political party, there's no way that they can be a Christian if they vote that way.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have learned is completely false.
And people throw that around so casually, and it's horrible.
It is.
Richard Rohr had a quote one time on a podcast where he was talking to some guys who grew up in church but weren't in church anymore, and were still Christians, and they were like, I just don't understand why I need to go to a building. I can have community with the people. I can have church. We can sit down and have a meal with the people I love. We can talk about God. Richard Rohr very thoughtfully kind of sits there quietly for a second, and he says, the thing that I think we miss though when we do that is that we end up only having community with people we like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think it's really important when we go to sort of an organized place. He's a Franciscan, right?
Yeah.
Franciscan priest. So obviously high church is important to him. But I just think any sort of community gathering would apply. Is what he's saying is you should go to church with the 80-year-old woman who's a widow who, doesn't live near her family. And you should go to church with the bum who couldn't get off the street but wanted coffee that day. And you should go to church with the guy who voted differently than you, is what I would say at this point.
Yes.
Because it gives you I think it gives you a broader perspective of the human condition and a broader ability to love God's people.
I agree with that 100%. I do feel like it's important to reinforce and to state, and I will say so unapologetically, and I've stated it many, many times very publicly.
Is this about Gunsmoke again?
The Gunsmoke was the greatest show.
Sorry, you were building up to something great, but I saw an opportunity.
I know, it was a good one. No, that the blending of the church and state, that's what I was trying to get to earlier, is catastrophic throughout history. That is what we want to avoid. We do not want a marriage of the powers that be and the work of the church, because I invite you, it lays out in the open. It's not hidden in a drawer somewhere. It's right out in the open. Go research history. As a student of history, it is nothing short of catastrophic every time the church tries to wed itself to the powers that be.
And you're to clarify that you're not talking about people in power who are Christian.
I'm talking about the church using its influence and its place within a community and a society to begin promoting or pushing towards a political agenda that is based on the partisan, views of any political party.
Where does every bit of spiritual or religious abuse come from? What is the crux? It's power.
Yes.
So as soon as we give the church more power than I think Jesus meant for it, more worldly power.
Worldly power. Because Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. So the moment we begin employing the tactics and the engine of this world's system is the moment we've gone off the rails.
That's when the humanity of individuals gets thrown out the window.
I agree.
But that's all the ones that they've tried before. If we do it again, though...
well, that's true. I never thought of that. I mean, this is a post-Gunsmoke world, so anything's possible.
We have Facebook now.
Which makes everything better.
If you, the listener, have any questions or if there's something you want to learn more about, you can send us an email at egcfpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Matt says your lips should almost be touching it.
Yeah, do that.